two men were forced to kneel on the rooftop, and the residents in the building had all become lambs to be slaughtered. Toby calmly walked behind them. Anyone who answers "I don't know" will meet this fate. In just a few minutes, several bodies had piled up below. They were all thrown to death, some even showing signs of mutation. Toby watched coldly from the rooftop, as if he had done something insignificant. Meanwhile, on the first floor, soldiers discovered a child hidden in a car. The captured child was Maggie's son, Herschel. Negan arrived just in time. He had hurriedly come after seeing what happened upstairs, fearing harm to the child. At the same time, Maggie and Negan's wife, Annie, had just infiltrated the 6th floor, and they hadn't yet found any survivors. After confirming it was safe, Annie breathed a sigh of relief. She took out a cloth bag from her pocket. Annie says she's 12 weeks pregnant and takes this to relieve pregnancy sickness. The child undoubtedly belonged to Negan. Maggie listened to the silence. Kill Negan. Revenge is her most wanted to do. But now she has another reason not to bear to do it, because she was also a mother, understanding the importance of a father's love for a child. Coincidentally, at this moment, Negan's voice came over the walkie-talkie.
Hey Annie, you called me?
I'm here.
I found someone.
Who?
Maggie's son.
Maggie was stunned. How could Herschel be there? She quickly took the walkie-talkie and asked for details.
If anything happens to him,
Turns out you had a stowaway that you didn't know about.
I'm coming to you. Negan.
He's safe. No.
You stay with Annie. It'll have to happen to me first.
Maggie fell silent again. Negan's firm tone just now left her unsure how to face the situation. After all they had been through, she understood that Negan was a principled person, but their unique enmity still made Maggie instinctively worry about her son. It was a conflicting feeling. Annie shook her head helplessly. Negan didn't want her to be involved in their feud, but after some thought, she said, "Negan didn't want me to tell you about the pregnancy. He was afraid you'd have a psychological burden when you try to kill him. Also, I know what he used to be like. Negan has told me everything." Annie continued, "We've all done bad things. I've seen what people do to each other for survival. Sometimes they hurt me, and sometimes I hurt them. I'm not proud of it, but it happened. Now all we can do is try to make the future better. I see Negan doing that." Maggie listened, and a strange mix of emotions filled her mind. It was a kind of conflict between wanting to let go and the inner voice telling her she couldn't. Downstairs, as Negan entered the room, Herschel said, "My mom told me to stay away from you," but at the same time, he was puzzled about why his mom always disliked this man. The current Negan felt lonely. Before his wife became pregnant, he wouldn't admit to his past mistakes. It was all about survival of the fittest. But now, on the verge of becoming a father, he could understand. He couldn't imagine what it would be like for his child to be born without a father. After some thought, he decided to reveal the truth and face it calmly. However, before Negan could speak, Herschel had already aimed the gun at him. Herschel often asked his mom, "Where did Dad go?" His mom always sadly replied that he was killed by bad people. Now Herschel had figured out that Negan was that bad person. Negan didn't deny it. This day was bound to come. He knelt down, prepared to be killed today, but he still said, "Listen, kid, what I took from you and your mom can't be undone no matter what I say or do. I don't blame you if you want to shoot me. The problem is, if you do, the gunshot will expose our location. Maybe I should die for the harm I caused to your father and family, but these people here shouldn't suffer because of me." Herschel, a smart and sensible child, naturally understood that Negan was speaking the truth. He had a look of resentment in his eyes, but he lowered the gun. Negan lowered his head. When Herschel pointed the gun at him just now, he had truly been prepared, but it had also terrified him. He couldn't fathom how his wife and child would survive the apocalypse without him. Of course, Maggie and Annie were unaware of the scene. They were still searching for their companions. Gunshots and screams echoed in the corridor. Toby had completely gone mad, ordering his men to kill anyone who didn't cooperate. If they didn't find weapons within an hour, burn the place down. After the soldiers left, Maggie emerged from the door. They had heard the jerk's words just now. Time was running out. Searching like this wasn't a solution. They were better off finding a way to deal with the soldiers. A few minutes later, the soldiers happened to find the room where Negan and the others were hiding, but after a thorough search, They found nothing. Toby lazily walked to the innermost part, wondering where these jerks could be hiding. He was about to have a drink to relieve his frustration when he noticed marks on the floor, because there are several footprints on the ground just as the wardrobe here disappeared, which cannot help but make him suspicious. He whistled for his men to be ready to fight outside. Inside, Negan and the others are even more tense, and as soon as they're spotted, they open fire.
That goddamn priest again, let's go!
Aaron and Gabriel rushed to the rooftop, but there was nothing up there. Toby gestured for them to drop their weapons and not resist. Aaron reluctantly looked at the situation. They had no way out and had to drop their guns. Seeing this, Toby also put down his weapon. These two were no longer a threat. He shook his head and started to lose control. Aaron's ability is very strong, and he works very hard under him. Why should he betray the Commonwealth for a group of robbers and warlords? At this moment, a figure was approaching them, Cole, wearing a mask. Toby immediately called for all his men to come up and support. The soldiers replied. Toby suddenly smiled. Gunshots were heard on the walkie-talkie, obviously clearing some minor obstacles, so he wasn't worried. As long as the soldiers came to the rooftop, he would be fine. However, the door opened, and Maggie and Annie came in. Everything that happened just now was their plan. Toby was utterly hopeless. Someone coming to the rooftop meant all the soldiers were dead. Toby's retribution came so quickly. The person he had pushed down earlier had turned into a zombie. Hearing the commotion, all the zombies stood up. Worst of all, this guy is still breathing, and he's going to live to see himself torn apart by the zombies. After a while, they gathered in a room, and now all the Commonwealth soldiers were dead, finally relieving the crisis. Negan looked at Herschel standing in the corner. The boy had been moping ever since he learned the truth. While Maggie went out to move the bodies, Negan walked over and said, "You and I have some unfinished business, don't we? How about this, you and your mom go back to the hilltop, help her rebuild the home. In a few years, when you're a bit older, come find me. I promise we'll settle this." Herschel just stared at Negan, remaining silent. At that moment, Maggie returned, and Negan walked away. He thinks Maggie won't let him near her son. The atmosphere became awkward. However, Aaron and Gabriel approached. They wanted to discuss the next steps. Maggie advised them not to go back to the Commonwealth, that they'd be shooting themselves in the foot, but they insisted on returning, planning to report the situation here lightly and keep tabs on the Commonwealth's movements. Now the biggest problem was how to settle the residents in these apartments. Lance might bring soldiers here soon, and staying meant waiting for death. But they couldn't think of a good solution for the time being. They couldn't help but lament that so many people died over a batch of supplies, since it wasn't someone from the flat who took the supplies. Who could it be? Little did they know that the person who took the weapons had dealings with them before. Fast forward to a few days ago, Lance dispatched a team to transport supplies and was ambushed on the road. The soldiers were killed, but the attackers were not from the apartments. They just happened to find some food and brought it back. The real killer was her. The 3 dead soldiers turned into zombies and met Maggie and the others. The murderer turned out to be Leah, Daryl's former girlfriend. Not sure why she's stealing weapons. Lance in the Commonwealth is having a hard time because he can't reach Toby. And there's something else going on in the community today. In the morning, Daryl went to work as usual. He entered the office, and Rosita was already there, as beautiful as ever. While they were chatting, their leader walked in. Vickers was assigning today's tasks, and Daryl and Rosita were assigned to a group responsible for patrolling and security in the area. At that moment, Sebastian arrived with his girlfriend. After a while, Daryl and Rosita donned their armor, preparing to go out on their mission. Meanwhile, Sebastian was bragging to 2 soldiers about how skilled he was at killing zombies. Daryl's somewhat mocking praise could be heard by everyone present, and Sebastian's face immediately changed color. As Daryl and Rosita walked out of the gate, 2 colleagues followed them. These were the 2 soldiers who had been listening to Sebastian's boasting. One of them said, "We've spotted a large group of zombies at the northern border. We've been sent to check it out." Daryl and Rosita didn't know what to say for a moment. They couldn't just go and ask the commander. However, they felt something was off. Soon, the 2 soldiers led Daryl and Rosita to the so-called northern border. From a distance, there was indeed a massive group of zombies outside the fence.
Where's everybody else?
Daryl asked in confusion. Sebastian arrived with a zombie. In fact, there was no order to clear out zombies. Sebastian's credit cards were suspended by Pamela, and he needed the money for expenses. The house surrounded by the zombies used to be a banker's residence, with a large amount of cash in the safe. Sebastian wanted Daryl and Rosita to go in and get it. Sebastian chose Daryl and Rosita because On one hand, Daryl had just mocked him, and on the other hand, regular soldiers were too weak. Showing them the access card for the office, Sebastian informed them that there was a solar generator in the garage that needed to be activated to use the access card. Before Sebastian could finish, Daryl immediately refused. There are so many zombies down there. If they go down there, it's a death sentence. Then Sebastian waved his hand, and a soldier killed the zombie with a knife. Sebastian ordered them to smear the zombie's guts on themselves and then make their way through the zombie horde to get him that cash. Daryl looked at him disdainfully. He didn't want to deal with this fool.
Hey, how are your kids doing?
Daryl was furious. How dare Sebastian threaten them with a child? The world of adults was never easy. That's probably why Maggie didn't want to come here. Eventually, Daryl and Rosita compromised. It was all for the sake of the child. And then Rosita started dissecting the zombies. Sebastian mentally sarcastically said, "Anyone has to do what they're told because his mother is Pamela." Half an hour later, they reached the foot of the mountain, covered in the flesh and blood of the zombies. Little by little, they were getting closer to the villa. With the protection of this armor, even if discovered by zombies, their chances of survival should be higher than usual due to their skills.